We tend to assume that power reveals itself in confrontation, that the decisive moment is a visible clash, where strength, courage, and speed determine the outcome. It feels reasonable to believe that control is exercised in the moment of action, because action is what we can see, force is measured, aggression is legible, and victory appears dramatic. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu uses the language of general, armies, enemies, but his argument is not ultimately about battlefield tactics. It's about how control is structured before pressure makes anything visible. He suggests that what appears decisive in conflict is often the final expression of earlier perception, earlier comparison, and earlier positioning. The battle doesn't create control. It reveals whether it was ever established. If this is true, then much of what we interpret as strength under pressure may be a misread. What feels decisive may already be reactive. What feels dominant may already be constrained by conditions that were never examined. And the assumption that power is exercised through force may conceal something more structural, that the greatest losses occur not in the clash itself, but in how situations are perceived, evaluated, and entered long before intensity is ever risen. To understand that claim, we have to examine how Sun Tzu defines control as disciplined perception under strain.
All right, super quick interruption. I just got back from the gym and I'm about to lock in and edit the video that you guys are watching right now, but this is what I use to help me get locked in. But this is what I rely on every day to keep forward movement in my life. Whatever. I mean, if you want to know more about it, in the description. Otherwise, I don't really care. Enjoy the video.
In Sun Tzu's framework, control doesn't begin with strategy. It begins with character. Before he describes maneuvers or strategies, he defines a moral law, the condition in which people are in complete accordance with authority, willing to follow undismayed by danger. That alignment is not achieved through force. It arises from authority that feels coherent, and coherence in this model is personal. He then defines the commander not by rank or tactical brilliance, but by 5 traits: wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness. The instinctive assumption is that these virtues are added to strategy, that they refine leadership but don't determine it. Yet Sun Tzu treats them as structural prerequisites. Without them, calculation cannot be held, discipline cannot stabilize, and command fractures under strain. This becomes clear in his warnings. He identifies 5 dangerous faults that can ruin a general: recklessness, cowardice, a hasty temper, jealousy of honor, and over-solitude for his men. None of these describe poor tactics. They describe distortions of identity under pressure. Recklessness accelerates action without grounding. Cowardice delays necessary engagement. A hasty temper invites manipulation. An excessive concern for a reputation makes one reactive to insult. And even misplaced compassion, when it weakens discipline, erodes authority. It would be easy to read this as a demand for emotional suppression, but that isn't what Sun Tzu's arguing. He insists that soldiers must first be treated with humanity so that attachment forms. If punishment precedes trust, then they won't submit. But if kindness replaces enforcement, they'll become useless. Authority is neither cruelty nor indulgence. If it's calibrated consistently, the army responds not to intensity but to stability. When collapse occurs, Sun Tzu traces it inwards. Insubordination arises when officers lack authority. Disorder emerges when structure reflects internal confusion. Conflict doesn't manufacture these weaknesses, it exposes them. Under pressure, identity becomes visual architecture. What often appears to be decisive leadership in crisis, like raised voices, visible urgency, dramatic command, is in this framework secondary. The real question is whether the person issuing the order has already cultivated alignment within himself. Because if ego, volatility, or insecurity governs the leader, Those forces propagate outward. Once they scale, they are no longer personal flaws. They become systematic instabilities. The unsettling implication is quiet but structural. Control is not assertive in the moment of conflict, it's revealed there. If authority fractures under pressure, it was never internally secure. Conflict doesn't create character, it operationalizes it. Sun Tzu's concept of the moral law is often read as loyalty, but it functions is more structural than emotional. It feels intuitive to assume that cohesion comes from shared incentives, pay, reward, punishment, hierarchy. Those mechanisms matter, and Sun Tzu acknowledges reward and discipline as instruments, yet he treats unity of spirit as something deeper than enforcement. He notes that an army animated by the same spirit throughout its ranks holds an advantage, independent of numbers. Belief in this sense is not optimism, it's psychological synchronization. When he illustrates this most clearly in his discussion of desperate ground. When soldiers are placed where there's no escape, they lose the instinct to flee in flight with unexpected intensity. At first glance, this reads as manipulation, corner men so they have no choice but to be brave. But the mechanism is more precise. When options narrow, internal division collapses. Survival becomes shared and indivisible. The mind stops negotiating alternatives and cohesion becomes automatic because doubt has nowhere to go. The common oversimplification is to interpret this as a call for recklessness, that leaders should manufacture desperation to extract performance. Sun Tzu doesn't advocate chaos, he warns repeatedly against entering unwinnable positions. When soldiers whisper in small groups, when rewards are too frequent and punishments multiply, he sees disaffection and exhaustion. Morale is not maintained through intensity, it's preserved through equilibrium. Belief, then, is not a surface emotion. It's the shared conviction that command is coherent and that effort is purposeful. Without it, order requires constant reinforcement. With it, compliance becomes voluntary and speed increases because doubt decreases. The army moves as one body because internal resistance has been reduced. We often equate control with authority imposed from above. Sun Tzu suggests that control is only sustainable when belief from below supports it. An army that obeys without internal accordance is brittle. It may move, but it won't hold. Cohesion is not created in crisis, it's tested there. If belief fractures under pressure, the fault rarely lies in the moment, it lies in the alignment that preceded it. If belief binds an army internally, perception determines how it engages externally. Sun Tzu's most cited claim, that all warfare is based on deception, is often reduced to trickery as though he were merely advocating dishonesty. But deception in his structure is not theatrical misdirection. It's the disciplined management of appearance so that the opponent reacts to what's presented rather than to what's real. When able, appear unable. When near, appear far. When strong, appear weak. These aren't dramatic flourishes. They're methods of shaping the field of interpretation. We tend to equate transparency with confidence and visible readiness with power. Yet Sun Tzu consistently shows that visibility invites adjustment. If your intentions are legible, your opponent redistributes his force. If your strength's obvious, then he fortifies accordingly. By contrast, concealed dispositions compel uncertainty, and uncertainty forces dispersion. He explains that the skillful general is one who opponents don't know what to defend or whether to attack. That invisibility is structural. By designing arrangements and altering plans, the commander prevents anticipation. The enemy must prepare for multiple possibilities at once, which weakens him everywhere. Numerical superiority becomes irrelevant if perception has already fractured his focus. The common oversimplification is to treat this as endorsement of manipulation for its own sake. But Sun Tzu doesn't celebrate deception as personality. He treats it as an instrument. Its use is to induce predictable reactions, offer bait, and the opponent moves towards it, stimulate disorder, and he advances prematurely. display vulnerability, and arrogance emerges. The mechanism is consistent. Perception shapes expectation, and expectation shapes action. The deeper implication is uncomfortable because it challenges the reliability of visible strength. What appears stable may be staged. What appears chaotic may be controlled, and what feels like a voluntary decision may be a response engineered by the structure of information presented. In conflict, reaction feels immediate and authentic, but in Sun Tzu's model, it suggests that reaction is often the product of manipulated perception. Control, therefore, is not exercised at the moment of contact, but in the arrangement of appearances beforehand. If perception can be directed, reaction follows without force. And once reaction begins, the side that set the perception has already constrained the range of possible responses. Sun Tzu treats conflict not as an emotional escalation, but as a comparison. Before any movement is made, he outlines 5 constant factors to be examined: the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline. These aren't inspirational abstractions, they're variables of timing, terrain, authority, organization, and alignment. Each must be weighed, and victory is then forecasted. It feels intuitive to believe that decisive leadership means acting quickly when tension rises. Under pressure, hesitation looks like weakness. Yet Sun Tzu insists that action without comparison is already a concession. He goes further by analyzing 7 specific considerations: which side is more aligned, which general more capable, where advantage lies in timing and terrain, where discipline is stronger, where timing is superior, where reward and punishment are consistent. He then structures this into a progression. Measurement leads to estimation, estimation to calculation, calculation to balancing of chances, and balancing to victory. The sequence's deliberate outcome is the final link in the chain of assessments. If earlier measurements are careless, the conclusion will be unstable. What appears to be a sudden loss is often the visible result of neglected comparisons. The oversimplification is to treat calculation as certainty, as though sufficient analysis eliminates risk. Sun Tzu doesn't promise immunity from uncertainty. He warns that few calculations lead to defeat, and none at all make defeat inevitable. The emphasis isn't on omniscience, but on disciplined evaluation. The deeper implication unsettles the common image of control. We tend to locate power in decisive action. Sun Tzu relocates this moment that a leader commits by the true decision that occurs when conditions are weighed and engagement is either pursued or refused. Once the army moves, the structure is already set. The visible clash merely confirms the prior assessment. If calculations have been thorough, conflict expresses advantage. And if it's been neglected, conflict exposes imbalance. In either case, the decisive moment was not the collision itself, it's the judgment that preceded it. Calculations determine whether to engage, but Sun Tzu adds a stricter condition. Before seeking victory, secure yourself against defeat. He writes that good fighters first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, and only then waiting for an opportunity to defeat the enemy. The order matters. It suggests that control is defensive before it's offensive. We tend to assume that power expresses itself in initiative, striking first, moving boldly, imposing will. Yet Sun Tzu's priority is installation. The first task is not to conquer, but to remove vulnerability. This feels counterintuitive. Defensive posture is often associated with weakness or passivity. Yet, in his framework, defense is structural security. The opportunity to defeat the enemy is provided by the enemy. The ability to avoid defeat lies in one's own hands. That distinction is precise. You cannot manufacture the other side's mistakes, but you can ensure that your own position doesn't collapse when pressure arrives. He explains that standing on the defensive indicates insufficient strength, while attacking indicates surplus strength. The phrasing is careful. Offense isn't the default expression of power, it's the surplus of it. If conditions don't provide that surplus, engagement becomes exposure. Victory then depends not on superiority, but on hope. The common oversimplification of this is to interpret this as an excessive caution, as though he were advising permanent avoidance. That would contradict his insistence on decisive engagement when advantage is clear. His point is structural. Security precedes ambition. If formation, discipline, and supply are unstable, aggression magnifies weakness rather than strength. He even reframes victory itself. The clever fighter, he says, excels in winning with ease, making no mistakes, conquering an enemy who's already been defeated. This doesn't imply that the opponent is literally defeated beforehand, but that the structural imbalance has already been established. When battle finally occurs, the outcome appears effortlessly because the imbalance was engineered earlier. The deeper implication challenges how we interpret visible dominance. What looks like boldness may conceal fragility if the foundation is unsecure, and what may appear as slow or restrained, in fact, could be the quiet construction of invulnerability. Under conflict, the side that cannot be easily broken exerts a different kind of control, one that doesn't depend on spectacle. In this model, the decisive question is not can we win, but can we lose? If defeat remains structurally possible, engagement is premature. Once that possibility has been minimized, victory becomes a matter of timing rather than survival. Security without adaptability hardens into predictability. Sun Tzu repeatedly returns to a simple but destabilizing claim. There are no constant conditions in warfare. Tactics must be regulated by the infinite variety of circumstances. He compares strategy to water, which avoids what is high and flows towards what is low, shaping its course according to the ground over which it moves. The image is restrained, but the implication is radical. Strength is not a fixed attribute, it's relational. It feels natural to search for stable principles like fixed formations, repeatable tactics, proven sequences. Once something works, the instinct is to preserve it. Yet Sun Tzu warns explicitly against repeating the tactics that have gained one's victory. The enemy adjusts, terrain shifts, timing alters advantage. A strategy that once produced success may, under new conditions, produce exposure. He distinguishes between direct and indirect methods, noting that while the direct approach may join battle, indirect approach could secure victory. These two modes generate endless combinations. The point isn't complexity for its own sake, but flexibility. Direct force applied to strength wastes energy, and indirect pressure applied to weakness multiplies it. What appears decisive may in fact be inefficient if it ignores structural asymmetry. The oversimplification here is to treat adaptation as improvisation, as though unpredictability alone constitutes strategy. Sun Tzu doesn't advocate randomness. Variation is grounded in observation. One must discover the enemy's dispositions, conceal one's own, and respond to revealed vulnerabilities. Adaptation is then disciplined responsiveness. His discussion of terrain reinforces this. Certain ground invites engagement, other ground demands retreat. Narrow passes, intersecting highways, desperate ground, each require different conducts. The error isn't choosing wrong once, but believing that one posture suits all conditions. A fixed mindset in fluid circumstances becomes self-sabotage. The deeper implication unsettles our perception of control. We often equate firmness with strength, consistency with authority, yet rigidity can signal fragility if it prevents adjustment. In Sun Tzu's model, true control lies in the capacity to modify plans without losing cohesion. The form changes, the structure remains intact. When pressure rises, instinct pushes towards familiar patterns. Sun Tzu's framework resists that impulse. He suggests that survival depends on reshaping without losing balance. Power, then, is not the ability to impose a single method, it's the ability to alter methods without surrendering advantage. Adaptation requires information. Without it, flexibility becomes guesswork. Sun Tzu ends his text not with tactics, but with spies. That placement is deliberate. After structure, cohesion, perception, calculation, security, and variation, he turns to foreknowledge. He states plainly that what enables a wise ruler and a good general to conquer is foreknowledge, and that such knowledge cannot be obtained from spirits nor deduced purely from calculations. It must come from other men. It feels intuitive to assume that intelligence is secondary to strength, that information refines strategy but doesn't determine it. Yet, Sun Tzu frames ignorance as inhuman. To march thousands of men and strain the resources of the state while remaining unaware of the enemy's condition is not merely inefficient, it's irresponsible. Conflict conducted without knowledge is waste. He categorizes 5 kinds of spies: local, inward, convert, doomed, and surviving. Each serve a different function. Some gather information, some distort it, some transmit false appearances deliberately. The convert spy, in particular, becomes the thread through which all others are coordinated. Information is not random, but it's systematized. The common oversimplification is to read this as espionage for advantage alone, but Sun Tzu's emphasis is on reducing uncertainty before engagement. Knowledge of the enemy's disposition allows concentration of force while compelling the opponent to disperse. If one side knows where and when the battle will occur, it can unite its strength. If the other side must prepare everywhere, it becomes weak at each point. The deeper implication returns to perception of control. When often interpreted confidence as authority, the sense that we understand the situation well enough to act, Sun Tzu separates confidence from knowledge. Foreknowledge must be cultivated deliberately. Without it, decisions rely on assumptions, and assumptions under pressure harden into error. Intelligence doesn't eliminate risk, but it narrows a field of unpredictability. In it narrowing that field, it restores proportion, but perception and reality. Control, in this final sense, is not domination. It's clarity, acquired through effort, protected through scarcity, and applied before force is committed. Control in Sun Tzu's model doesn't automatically appear at the point of impact, but by the time force becomes visible, the decisive work has already been done. Identity has either stabilized authority or quietly weakened it. Belief has either unified action or left it brittle. Perception has either constrained the opponent or exposed intention. And calculation has either narrowed risk or ignored it. What looks like strength in the moment is often the final expression of those earlier conditions, which means that when control fractures under pressure, the fracture is rarely new. It's simply revealed. The error didn't begin in the clash itself, but in how the situation was perceived, measured, and entered.